Overseas tonight, France on high alert following the arrest of a man at Disneyland Paris. The 28-year-old apprehended near the entrance carrying 2 handguns, ammo, and a Quran. According to papers found on the suspect, he calls Paris home. However, no further details immediately available. A woman with him, described as his girlfriend, also detained. Obviously a disturbing story, one we are going to discuss here at the anchor desk with Congressman Steve Russell from Oklahoma, U.S. Army Ranger veteran, also a veteran of the conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan, and likewise here at the anchor desk, a familiar face, a veteran of Afghanistan, Brian Mast, running for a U.S. congressional seat in Florida. Gents, it is good to have you here this evening on Newsmax Prime. And of course, for purposes of full disclosure, I served in Congress, you're serving in Congress, and you hope to get to Congress. And it's good to have 2 fellow conservatives here. Before we talk politics, let's talk about the war on terror and what is happening in Paris. Obviously, Steve, details sketchy on what was going on at Disneyland Paris. But is there a situation in Paris where it is just the magnet for terror now?
Well, we want to wait and see what the details are with this individual. Is he a French citizen? Is he not? Was it criminally related? Was it not? Still remains to be seen. However, France is trying to come to grips. You had the former President Sarkozy. He had warned about security issues. That was rejected. But now they see in the last year and a half that it's a real problem. They're going to have to continue to tighten up security measures to avoid it in the future. And
in the last Paris attack, it looked like some of those folks had come in as refugees. Now, Brian, it's being reported that ISIS has its own passport industry, which when they're able to get official documents, it's tougher to tell who is who. If you were serving in the United States Congress, what could we do here to protect our homeland?
Well, we were just talking about a little bit about this, and one of the things that we can certainly put in place is to make sure that there's accountability within those foreign countries for those that have passports, to make sure they're not able to move from one country to another if they come from certain places. That's definitely one of the things that should be in place. I floated the idea to some others before that for those coming from certain marked countries that they should be given different requirements, perhaps the idea of polygraph tests or things like that as a part of their system for entering.
And at the very least, we better be taking a look at what they're doing on social media. Again, amazingly, astonishingly, this administration, in setting up so-called new guidelines, has left social media out, Steve.
Well, I think one of the things that, as I've really studied this issue on Syrian refugees, is that we can't confuse the resettlement folks from the wider refugee issue. There is a difference. We don't have a land bridge that comes to the United States. It's a little far for a rowboat for them to get across the ocean. However, that said, we've got to take stringent measures with our visa waiver program. We still have an issue with our southern border. The easy entryways into the United States deserve our attention, but we have to be careful at the same time we don't eliminate needed programs for those seeking asylum that are legitimate.
Policy is always predicated upon politics and vice versa. You got to get elected to offer legislation. I know you've got some key legislation, but before we get to that, Steve, let's talk about Brian's campaign. And look, I've been down this road before. When I wanted to run, I'd call incumbents and they'd say, well, let me wait till after the primary to see who the nominee is. You're getting involved before a primary. Why are you for Brian Mast?
Well, look, I'm sure there's some good candidates in this field, but here's why. We need more combat veterans in Congress. I mean, it's not a litmus test, for service in the Congress, but one thing that people like Brian are people that have already put the country ahead of themselves. They know how to work as a team. They know how to accomplish missions, recover from setbacks, and get things done. America is ready for a vision, not just everybody thinking about what's wrong with the country and blaming it on somebody else. Let's put all that aside and get something done. We can do that with our veterans.
Brian, I know you welcome Steve's help. Might we expect to see other veterans in Florida on your behalf in the days ahead?
I'm certainly very hopeful of that. One of Congressman Russell's colleagues, Ryan Zinke from Montana, has also been gracious enough to come out and support my campaign. But that's where I tell people about these two. You know, I think there's certainly something to be said about the idea of offering to serve your country before you ever ask to lead your country. I think it's a good progression that one comes before the other.
And I think back to my class. 20 years ago may have been the first Republican majority in 40 years, but precious few of us were veterans of the armed forces. So obviously, if you're going to represent people, you need to have some folks there to truly represent veterans. Before we go, Steve, I know you've got a piece of legislation that will soon come to a vote. Tell us about it and tell us what you expect the administration's reaction to be. About a minute remains.
Well, the Iran Terror Financier Act, it would prohibit those that are on the current terrorist and human rights violation sanctions lists from being having sanctions lifted on the joint agreement. When I read the joint agreement, looked at Annex 2, you had more than 50 individuals that were terrorist violators and human rights violators. We wanted to know why. This bill simply says before the president can lift it that they have to have justification to Congress as to why. President's threatened to veto it, but this is good for the security of the United States.
15 seconds. Last word to Brian Mast. What have you learned with the time you spent with Steve Russell on the campaign trail?
Well, I've learned a pretty good amount from him, but I think probably the best thing I've learned is to basically always put forward a positive message. Don't just be the one out there saying that we're going to be, answering no to this, this, and this. Make sure you let people know what we can actually accomplish and why we should be there, how we can move the peg forward. And I think that's pretty important for all of us.
Sounds like a good idea, and as one who has been there before, I certainly appreciate it. Well, you heard what these two gentlemen, what these two veterans have to say. You've also heard about a campaign for Congress. Agree or disagree with what they've got going? I'd love to hear from you. Send your comments to me at newsmaxtv.com/comments.